can be quite regimented. Write down what you've got to do. And when you see there's something that's going to take a lot of energy, don't plan other things for that day. So instead of doing the doctor's appointment and then thinking, I'll just duck into the supermarket on my way home and, there's that bill to pay, I'll do that too. No, spread it out. Don't do it all at once. Try and conserve the energy for the important things throughout your week. You might have to still alter that and be flexible, but by having it spread out, you won't be kicking yourself because you didn't get it all done. It's a matter of prioritising, a bit like we talked about with Elizabeth before. What things are more important? If you can think of a vase, if you fill that vase with a whole lot of little inconsequential things, you won't have time for the big things that you want to put in after. But if you put the big important things in first, then maybe there'll be energy to put the little things around it, and you'll fit a whole lot more in. It's also about eliminating tasks. Again, I'm sure their ears burn every time I do this, but my mother-in-law irons jocks. Now, I had to get my husband out of that whole idea because there was no way I was going to iron anything more than the absolute necessities. So it's looking at eliminating things that you don't have to do. It's delegating. Can someone else actually do it for me? But it might be elimination of some things. It's also about pacing. Do I need to do it all today? Could I actually think about this a different way? Housework's a classic one for that. I've got one girlfriend who Monday's her house cleaning day. She has to do it all on Monday, and you can't interrupt that, and she can't do anything else on other days. Turn that upside down and kind of say, well, yeah, maybe doing a little bit each day will actually conserve energy, give you time for other things, and then you can do something else on Monday other than housework. Some people adjust the way they do and they say, well, I'll do a room a day. Other people say, well, I'll do a task a day. I might do the floors today, but I'll leave the dusting for another day. So it's looking at, well, how am I going to pace myself to get these jobs done? It's also about time management and sharing. So that calendar where there are columns for all the family, it's a bit of a planning tool. You can spread out the tasks. You can come up with creative ways of getting jobs done and not having to do them all yourself. Communication is a big part of fatigue management. The social workers come back in this session and we talk about positive communication. But we also talk around the barriers to communicating about fatigue. You can't see fatigue. It's really hard to explain. And most people tell us that they have trouble explaining fatigue to other people in their family or other people in their lives. So we do a practical session, and again, you've got a handout in your pack there of strategies to communicate, making a plan of it. Who do you need to communicate to about your fatigue? What do they need to know? How are you going to say it? So in this session, we actually plan a communication. Communication is fundamental to dealing with any problem. I think everybody would easily identify that. But in a situation like MS, where the signs of fatigue might not be obvious to other people, being able to communicate your experience of fatigue becomes even more important. So in this session, we encourage people to consider using effective communication. And some of the strategies are things like timing, like when is a good time to communicate your needs. Might not be when everything else is happening straight after school and work and tea's on the boil and everything's happening, but it might actually be that you need to say, let's go for coffee because we need to have a chat. The whole idea of active listening, clarification, making sure that what you've said has been heard and understood, and making I statements. So accepting that this is your experience of fatigue and this is how it makes me feel. There's a lot of strategies to do with communication, and you might want to make use of that plan to draft a technique. And by the end, by the 6th week, we hope that people have identified some strategies that they're going to implement to make a difference. Along the way, because we've got a week in between each session, we encourage people to choose a homework task, something that they're going to try that's different from what they've already tried, and come back and report on that. So by the end, they will have identified, these ones work, these ones were hard for me, but maybe these ones are important and I need to come up with a strategy to overcome that obstacle. So when you look at that fatigue management plan, one column is the strategy. I think we've then got how and when. So actually thinking about when are these things going to happen. But then we encourage people to think, well, what's going to stop me from doing that? And that's usually quite easy to come up with. You can easily identify what's going to stop you from doing more exercise, or what's going to stop you from delegating tasks. Overcoming that obstacle is the challenge in this session. So we spent a lot of time trying to help people come up with ways, well, how are they going to implement that strategy? When is reasonable to do these things? How am I putting unreal expectations on myself? I would say it's good if you make one change in a week. That's fantastic. Then if you can add another change after that, that's a good strategy too, rather than thinking, I had 6 strategies that I wanted to try and they all failed. Well, that's probably because you're trying to do 6 all at once. But if you do one at a time and gradually make changes, that can be really positive. And 6 weeks later, we follow up with participants to check how they're going and to see if there's any other strategies they want to try. We try and be a little bit scientific about it. We're all encouraged to come up with assessment tools and measures, and we use the modified fatigue impact scale, but we also incorporate now a sleep questionnaire. There's been some studies done in America where they recognise that sleep disturbances, things like restless leg syndrome, are actually appear at a higher rate in the people with MS population. So people with MS have a higher likelihood to have a sleep disturbance as well. So when people fill out their sleep questionnaire and recognise there are some things that maybe need more investigation, we would encourage them to look at that, because they're the secondary fatigue factors, and if we can do something about those, maybe we've made a big impact on a person's experience of fatigue. These scales are able to help people tease out even further where their experience of fatigue is, whether their fatigue has more impact on their physical functioning, on their cognitive functioning, or on their psychosocial functioning. And that also then helps to work out what strategies will be more useful. These were the outcomes of the last course that we ran, where all bar one person, when they completed their scores at the end, showed an improvement. What I will say is they rated themselves as managing their fatigue more effectively, because fatigue is so subjective. But their experience of managing their fatigue improved after they'd done the 6-week course and had implemented the strategy. So I think that's really positive. So back to Elizabeth. She's gone through... Oh, no, I shouldn't tell you that yet. Elizabeth was assessed individually in the first instance, and then she was able to join a fatigue management program. And she identified the following. Her fatigue was worse in the afternoons, which meant she had difficulty managing the children after school. There was some element of temperature intolerance there. Her thinking tasks were more difficult when she was fatigued. So that was perhaps an element of nerve fibre fatigue. When walking distances, her chances of stumbling increased. So whereas before she'd identified a bit of weakness, now she could actually see that it was related to how far she walked. She didn't get around to the household tasks. She knew she wasn't getting around to them as well. And she did actually feel guilty when the house wasn't as clean as she thought it should be. Exercise was now a thing of the past, even though she had previously enjoyed walking. She worked from home, do you recall that? She was falling behind on her work commitments, and this was stressing her out. Because it was at home and there was no one kind of there to support her, the stress level was building up because she knew she was falling behind. She was waking 3 times a night on average due to going to the toilet twice, and spasms often woke her once. And this was preventing her from getting a good night's sleep. She drank lots of coffee during the day and during the evening, and she often missed lunch because she was too tired to go to the effort of making it for herself. So she came up with some strategies. She probably tried a number and maybe they didn't work, but in the end she came up with a fatigue plan. This might be too hard to read. I'll read it through for you. Her first strategy was that she was going to get up at 7 o'clock on weekdays. Monday to Friday was the when, and home is the where. She wasn't sure what the obstacles were because there were so many, that I don't want to get up at 7. It's too dark in the mornings. It's hard to get up. But her husband was brought on board. He was going to encourage her to get up at 7. He knew that was her plan, so he was going to encourage her to get up at 7 o'clock. She hadn't been having rest breaks, so she identified rest breaks would probably be a good strategy. So realistically, she knew she could rest on Monday, Tuesday and Thursday between 1 and 2. But on Wednesday, I think it was once a month on a Wednesday was the retirement village church service. So she'd have her rest break earlier. She'd have it between 12 and 1. And on Friday, she had other things she wanted to do, so that'd be between 10 and 11. And she was actually going to rest at home on the bed and use a relaxation tape and set the alarm to rouse herself at the end. She'd identified that she needed to do some more exercise, and she liked the idea of the sweat program, a water-based program. So she'd found that there was one nearby that she could do fortnightly, so it alternated with her involvement in the retirement village. She knew that would be at the local pool. She knew there'd be obstacles because it's hard to get yourself back into that routine. So she decided she had a friend who lived very near there, so her reward would be having lunch with her friend. So she set the task, I'll do it, and then I'll reward myself by having a lunch out. Another strategy she worked out was that she needed to designate work times. So she set herself a bit of a roster that she'd work Monday and Tuesdays for 3 hours each in her home office, and she would ring fence that time so nothing else would interfere with it. She had thought about her exercise routine, so she thought, well, maybe Monday, Tuesday and Friday I'll walk part way to school with the kids, and then I'll return home and be able to continue with the rest of my plan. And her husband and children were going to encourage her with that. The physio had given her some exercise, some stretches, although now we know that that was pointless because she won't do them. But she was going to try and do those on Wednesday and Thursday, and she was going to do them while the porridge was cooking, because she recognised that this was kind of wasted time. She stood and she could actually stand there. The physios are very good at coming up with very practical stretches. She could stand there in the kitchen and do her calf stretches while the porridge cooked. So it put the two things together. And another strategy was that she was going to eat a proper lunch. She was going to do this every day at home, except the day that she was out with a friend. And the way she was going to ensure she did that was she was going to make her lunch when she made the kids' lunches in the morning. So it duplicated what she was doing. For Elizabeth, doing the fatigue plan was one aspect, but then it was actually important for her and helpful to her to put it into a weekly plan. So that was kind of like the next step of being very organised, but it meant she knew she had her weekly roster of what she wanted to do, what she needed to do, and could visually look at that and see if there was a balance. So then when it came to maybe booking in appointments for other things, or if other things came up, she could visually see how she needed to adjust that. Now, this works for some people, it might not work for everybody. I kind of like this idea of being able to see what's happening and get that plan occurring. It also means that you can allow yourself to do things. Now, it's really not clear there. By having the afternoon rest break, she could then have some time in the afternoon to do some preparation of other things that she was involved with. She recognised again that time with the children when they came home from school was often a stressful time because she was feeling tired again. But by allowing herself to sit with the kids and watch a TV show, that gave her a rest. Perhaps not as good a rest break as the one when they were at school, but still another rest break before getting on to the evening meal preparation. Some other things in there were considering the morning procedure. She recognised that she liked a warm shower, but it actually did tire her out. So instead of feeling she had to shower and get dressed and then have breakfast, she put breakfast in the middle. So it gave her again a time to sit down and recover before getting up and getting dressed. So by looking at it, because it's written down visually, sometimes it helps you to sort out what's happening and when it's happening. So thinking back to what we said at the very start of today, when I said to you to think about your experience of fatigue and what you hoped to get out of this session, can you see that there are some strategies that perhaps you haven't tried that now you might be able to try? Yes? That would be my hope, that some of the strategies we've talked about would be strategies that you also can not just see as up here, but can be strategies for you to incorporate in your daily life as well.